Hello, hello. Happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. Come on in, come on in. Let's get this party started today. We are talking about landlord and tenant wars, unpaid rent versus needed repairs. This is definitely going to be a discussion that will resonate well with many of you who are landlords and housing providers. Um, but I'm also going to share some information for tenants. Before I get started again, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I'm Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. This is what I do each and every Monday. I'm live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, connecting landlords, tenants, and the entire rental community. But I do want to give this disclaimer: information that I share on any of these platforms is not considered legal advice. However, I do provide the industry's best practices, tips, and I will answer your questions when I'm live and online. All right. For those of you who desire to contact me when I'm not online, I'm going to provide you with my email address. I'm going to provide you with my website. So if you want to connect with me when I'm not live, if you need coaching, property management services, or consulting, as well as training, please look me up. If you are in the DC metropolitan area, I'm willing to work with you, help you out with your rental property with your tenants. And for those of you who are tenants, you have been communicating with me by way of email as well as on that YouTube channel. I just want to say thank you so much. So thank you for your time. Thank you for showing up today, guys. I promise that today's segment is going to resonate with somebody. If you are a landlord, if you know someone who is a landlord, today's segment is where you want to be locked in at. If you are a tenant or you know someone who is a tenant, this is a segment to tune in. Okay. So any questions that you guys have, any comments, remarks, or observations, please throw it in the comment section. As a matter of fact, let me know where you're tuning in from. Let me know your geographical location. Let me know which platform you're watching on, because again, I'm live on YouTube, I'm live on Facebook, and I'm also live on LinkedIn. So let me know which of the platforms you're tuned in from on today. All right. And if you're watching a replay, thank you so much. Type in the chat box replay. All right. So while I am preparing to share some hot off the press real life situations that are currently active, I do want you to just, if there is an ounce of information I share today, if you find it helpful, please tag somebody else or share it with someone. Maybe this information does not relate to you. Maybe you are not a landlord. Maybe you're not a tenant. Maybe you're just tuned in because you know that this information is available, right? Maybe share it with somebody else because somebody needs this information on today. All right. All right. So let me give you my email address for those of you who desire to contact me. Let me do that right now. I don't want to wait until the end. Let me share my email address. So at the bottom of the screen, that is my email address, info@landlordlife.com. That is how you can find, you can get in contact with me rather. I know that sometimes when I'm online, many of you have questions that I may not have time to go into. I may not be able to take a deep dive in your specific scenario or situation. But if you email me, I will follow up with someone from my team will follow up with you. Okay. All right. So let me get into the discussion today because it's all about landlord and tenant wars, unpaid rent versus needed repairs. Now, let me just say that for those of you who are new in the space of being a landlord or a housing provider, for many, it is not for the faint at heart. Now, this segment, although it may resonate with many of you who are landlords, it is specifically felt in smaller rental businesses. So for landlords who have maybe a few units or 12 units, they don't really have like hundreds and thousands of doors. They self-manage their own property. They manage their own tenants. They manage their own business. Those landlords are usually the ones who are, and not that they're exempt and not that they're the only ones who go through it, because Listen, when it comes to rental property from East Coast to West Coast to across the seas, there are always going to be challenges with landlord and tenant relationships. But in many cases, the landlord and tenant wars are severely felt by the smaller landlords, if that makes sense. So I'm going to share some situations that are active, that are actually in play as we speak. Some situations that are, I don't believe that it's going to turn out well for everybody. Okay. Not for all parties, because here's the thing. And here's why I say that. You have a landlord, you have a tenant. And if they are each at odds, they're angry, they're feuding, they're fighting with each other, amongst each other, somebody is going to win, somebody is going to lose. It may not be a fair outcome, right? And so I don't want people to set a high expectation. Let me speak to landlords first. Please don't set a high expectation that you're always going to have perfect tenants that will always adhere to the rental terms of that lease agreement. Ideally, yes, that's something that you should expect. That's something you should shoot towards, rather. But leave room for error, because sometimes not all tenants are bad. Let me just say that I have been in this space for almost 30 years, between managing property, being a property management educator, being a housing inspector, being a coach, a consultant, and all the other things I've done in my career in almost 30 years, right? I've come to recognize that just depending on the type of property, depending on the rental community where it is, there are always going to be issues. There are always going to be challenges from one neighborhood to the next. It doesn't matter if it's Beverly Hills. It doesn't matter if it's Southeast DC. It doesn't matter if it's Miami, Florida. It doesn't matter where the rental property is. There are always going to be issues. A pipe will break, a toilet will overflow, a cabinet will come off the hinge. Some tenants will not cut the grass. Some tenants will not adhere to the terms of the rental lease agreement. They will not keep the property clean, right? And I know that for those of you who are smaller landlords, you are expecting tenants to get into these rental properties and to take care of it like you would, because many of you have lived in the rental properties that you are now leasing out to others. I get it. But here is why I don't want you to set the bar so high that your tenants miss and then all of a sudden things just go bad really fast. One of the things that I like to say is this: please treat your business like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. But if you treat it like a business, it's going to pay you like a business. Here is why that's important. I have had colleagues of mine who were so perturbed because they did not treat their business like a business, meaning that when something went wrong, they were in their feelings. Some of them were in arguments with their tenants. One of my colleagues in particular, she was so upset that she literally cussed her tenant out. She said, "Karissa, if I could burn my house down with my tenant in it, I would." Those were her exact words. And yes, she did give me permission to say it, and she's probably watching, laughing right now. But true story, sometimes things will happen that will push you to an extreme end. And sometimes it is unmanageable when it gets that out of control, where the respect is gone out the window. There is no respect from the tenant for the landlord, or from the landlord for the tenant. When respect is not there, when communication is not there, sometimes you have a lot of these issues that are starting to surface more and more and more. Now, here's the thing. And again, not that things are always going to be perfect. But if you don't wear your emotions on your sleeve, I promise that this is not the industry to wear your feelings on your sleeve. I get it. It is frustrating as a housing provider. Let me just put on a hat and the role of a housing provider. It is frustrating as a housing provider that has, let's say, maybe you lived in the home most of your life. You all of a sudden decide to rent it out, or maybe you have been renting out that space for years and you wanted to provide quality, decent, safe, affordable housing to someone who you believe would take care of the property. Then all of a sudden you visit the property only to find out that there are holes in the walls. I'm not just talking about small holes. I'm talking about body holes, meaning that what is a body hole? I'm glad that you asked. So a body hole is maybe a situation where something happened in that rental property. Maybe there was a fight, an altercation. Maybe somebody tripped up and hit the wall really hard and put a large hole in the wall, right? So imagine, if you will, going into a rental property. You see this massive body hole in the wall that nobody told you. The tenant didn't contact you. Nobody said anything. You didn't receive an email. You didn't receive a text message. You didn't receive a telegram. You didn't receive a fax. You had no idea that when you walked into that property, that you would see this massive body hole in the wall, right? And so you have a conversation. To your surprise, you're a little taken back because there's this huge hole in your wall. You don't know how it got there. So you ask the tenant, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, there's a hole in that wall. What the heck happened? And the tenant all of a sudden just gets selective amnesia and does not remember, does not know how the hole mysteriously appeared in the wall. Okay, so as you're walking through the property, you recognize that when you look down at the carpet, there is an iron mark, and it's not just a mark. So it looked like someone put the iron on the carpet and just let it sit there. So there's a burn mark that scorched the carpet down to the wood, right? And so there are a lot of telltale signs that, you know what, this is someone who may need some help with managing housekeeping and understanding how to take care of the rental property. And so as a landlord, like I said, imagine the frustration of seeing some of these plus many, many more things. Okay. And then a tenant either just doesn't care, never contacted you. Then all of a sudden they say, well, I'm just not going to pay my rent. If you're not going to make the repairs, I'm going to stop paying the rent. Now, granted, the tenant damage is not the landlord's responsibility, unless, of course, it's spelled out in the lease that the landlord will be responsible for tenant damage. In many cases, I don't know about you, but in many cases, I have never created a lease making me responsible as a housing provider, making me responsible for tenants' damage. In any lease that I've created, whether it's for myself or for my colleagues, my clients, my friends, associates, or people who just needed help, I have never put that language in a rental lease agreement. Okay. And so for me, that would be heartbreaking. It would be frustrating, to say the least, to walk into a rental property with those type of conditions going on. Okay. And so now here the tenant is now saying to you, listen, if you don't make these repairs, I am not going to pay the rent. And so now there's this huge argument that begins to become so loud that the neighbors could hear it halfway down the block between the landlord and the tenant. Okay, so we're still talking about landlord and tenant wars. True story. So the tenant is not paying the rent, and the landlord has emphatically stated that they are absolutely not paying for the tenant damage. They are not paying for any repairs. Now, let me just go on a little bit more in this story, because I'm going to leave out some details, because I'm not going to give all of the situations that are happening, because there are a lot in this one household. But there are some repairs that are needed. So in the tenant's bathroom, the toilet has overflowed. There is raw sewage on the floor in that rental property. So that landlord is required to make sure that the tenant has a bathroom that is operable, especially if that is the only bathroom. And so the landlord says, you know what, I'm not doing anything. I don't care what you say. I don't care that you don't have a toilet. The stove, let me just go to the kitchen. I have never, ever seen, until this situation, I've never seen a stove where the glass was broke, the doorknob was hanging. I'm sorry, the oven knob was hanging off, right? And the tenant, I guess, I don't know, used some glue or something, tried to put it back on, but it was upside down. It was really bad. The glass was broken. The door was almost off the hinge. The oven door, that is, was almost off the hinge. And so the tenant said, listen, I don't have a stove. I can't cook. You're required to make sure that I have a stove, which is in fact true. The landlord was also required to make sure that the toilet was working. In fact, that is true. But the landlord made a decision that they were not going to make any repairs under no stretch of the imagination, under no circumstance, right? And so here we have a situation where now the landlord is threatening to take the tenant to court. And the tenant says, well, you know what? Screw you. I'm going to take you to court. And so there's this legal battle going back and forth, back and forth. But here's where this situation gets really, really bad. So this property is in a jurisdiction where the landlord must have a renter's license. I'm sorry, a business license to run and operate that rental property. And for those of you who know, if you don't have those things in place and you try to take a tenant to court, no matter how much damage they have done, no matter how much rent they have not paid, if you do not have a business license in jurisdictions where they are required, where landlords are required to have those things, the judge will kick that case out of court. I know that it's frustrating. This is why each and every Monday I'm here, 7:30 p.m. I'm sharing information. It costs you nothing but your time to show up and get this information. Now, granted, laws are going to be different in various states and various jurisdictions. And so that's why in the beginning, one of the things that I always ask is, where are you tuned in from? I like to share information. I like to touch on laws in different jurisdictions. I recognize I have viewers on the East Coast. I have viewers down South. I have viewers Midwest, and the laws are not the same everywhere. Okay. So let me just put that in the way, because I want you to know and understand that in some areas, it can be extremely hard for landlords, while in other jurisdictions, it's a lot harder for tenants. But again, in this situation, this landlord was required to have a business license to legally run and operate their rental property business. And as it turned out, this landlord never had a business license, had always rented the property out. They lived in a home at some point, but they moved out. They rented the property out. And unfortunately, taking that situation to court did not help the landlord. So that added fuel to the fire. So now the landlord is really upset because they can't even take this tenant to court and get the tenant evicted. As wrong as the tenant is, as wrong as the landlord is in terms of not making sure that the toilet was operable, not making sure that the tenant had a stove that they can cook on, because you have to provide those things if that is a requirement. And so the landlord just took a stand and said, you know what, I'm just not doing anything. I don't care what you do. I don't care how you live, but I'm not paying for you to stay in my rental property as you're damaging the property. And now the tenant is just not paying rent. Well, that's bad for business when you have a rental property that is not producing income. One of the things that I always say is that brick and mortar don't pay rent, but tenants do. And so in this situation, there are a lot of things that could have happened on the front end that could have prevented this landlord from going down that rabbit hole. Okay. Now, I want to pause and I want to get your feedback. What do you think could have been done maybe months in advance that could have possibly prevented this landlord from going into their rental property and seeing that condition? Because it didn't just happen overnight. But let me get your feedback. What do you think this owner could have done that could have potentially prevented these type of situations from happening? So let me go to my comment section here. Hello, hello. Happy Monday. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, here's your question. Can a landlord rent an apartment as is, an as is condition if the tenant agrees to it? That's a good question. And so to answer that question, um, yes, in fact, landlords do it all the time. Landlords rent property as is. And if it's a tenant that is not participating in some sort of housing program where an inspection may be required, some tenants will take rental property in as is condition, especially if they are in a desperate situation. Sometimes tenants who may have less than desirable credit, they will accept a rental property in an as is condition because they recognize they don't have good credit to get into maybe a better rental community. Or maybe you have tenants who are not from this country, right? They sometimes also take apartments in as is condition. And so that is a really good question. A landlord, landlords do it all the time. I see it all the time. Listen, the condition of some of these rentals that I've seen over the years, I was surprised that a human would allow another human to live in the condition that I've seen some of these rental properties. And so thank you for that question. It happens all the time. If the two are in agreement and the tenant is willing to accept the property the way that it is, sign the lease, then yes. Would I recommend it as a tenant? I would not recommend that a tenant do that. I would not suggest that a landlord do that because from a tenant's perspective, that is so to me. Let me just say that let me put myself in the shoes of a tenant. I would definitely want a place that's decent and safe, that's sanitary, that would make me feel good to call home. And if I recognize, I see, or I know that a landlord is willing to rent to me like that, I already know they don't care about the rental property. So they're definitely not going to care about me as a tenant renting from them. As a tenant, I would always expect for my landlord, my housing provider, to provide quality service. And as a tenant, I would never, ever accept anything less than what I deserve. And so if you are a tenant or you know someone who is a tenant, please know that as a tenant, you still have rights, even if you don't have good credit, even if there is a language barrier. Landlords are required to adhere to housing codes and standards and regulations and laws. And so as a tenant, I would say shop around. I know that sometimes desperate times, desperate situations calls for, desperate decisions that have to be made. I get it. I've seen it. I know that sometimes if a tenant is homeless or facing, maybe there's a possibility of them being homeless and they really need to make a decision, sometimes they will quickly accept a rental unit that is less than par, right? It's not on board. But I really appreciate that question. Thank you so much. But as a landlord, let me just also, because I spoke from a tenant's perspective. So for landlords, here's the thing: when you rent your property, you know that repairs are needed, and maybe you don't have the money. I get it. I've been in this industry for almost 30 years and nothing surprises me anymore. So from being a property manager to being a housing inspector, I've seen it all. I'm not really surprised anymore. I just shake my head sometimes because things are still going on after all this time. But from a landlord perspective, and let me just put on my head as a coach. You don't want to rent your property in those type of conditions because ideally you want to attract your ideal tenant. And when you're putting your service, your product, and the rental property is your product, when you are putting your product in that condition out for people to rent that space, you are setting the bar extremely low. People will not respect you. People will not take care of your property. And so if you're putting out bad service, if you're putting out a bad product, please don't expect your tenants to take care of it. Okay, it's going to cost you more money in the end to take care of that property because let's say, for instance, the toilet is running. The tenant doesn't tell you that the toilet is running. So we already know, those of us who pay bills, right? We pay water bills. We know that a running toilet, a leaky faucet, a shower that's dripping, maybe the diverter or something needs to be replaced, right? All of that will cause that water bill to increase. But now let's just say that the toilet is running, the toilet is overflowing, or maybe it just needs some repair. And every time the tenant flushes a toilet, it leaks at the base of the toilet. Now, you as a landlord, because you rented the property in an as-is condition, you never go to take care of the repairs. You never conduct inspections. So you don't know that it went from a -5 property to a -1,000 property, right? And so all of a sudden you go and you realize that there is mold everywhere. The floors are messed up. It's going to cost you more money in the end by being a slum landlord. Okay. It is never, ever, ever going to work in your favor for you if you are the type of landlord who don't like to make repairs. And I commonly like to refer to them as slum lords. All right. Hey, Ronnie G, thank you so much for tuning in. All right, here is your comment. Police kicked in the door of a unit because the tenant had a warrant out on them and wouldn't open the door. I was fined because I didn't replace the door in 24 hours. The tenant had a roommate. I do hope that you have language in your lease agreement that specifically addresses this type of situation. But now here's what I would do. I would also follow up with the police department to see if there's any way, because sometimes what you don't know can or will hurt you. And if you're not asking questions, ask the police department, who's going to be responsible for my door? So you were fined because the door was not replaced in 24 hours. Now, technically, as a housing provider, that may be your responsibility. But now nothing stops you from getting that money back from the tenant, especially if it's in a lease. Find out from the police department if they have funding or funds to repair or replace that door as well. So some jurisdictions I've seen, the police department, they have funds available and have actually paid. I don't know how all of that works. I haven't dealt with that directly because normally I'm usually hands-on when it comes to a situation. As a matter of fact, I had a situation recently where there was a warrant issued for a tenant, and the police department reached out to say, hey, we have a warrant. We're just giving you a heads up. We're coming between such and such hours. And so I just wanted to make sure that the team or somebody was available with the key, a locksmith who could change the lock, right? Versus having to replace the door, because sometimes it's not just the door. It's the door. It's the door frame. I've seen a whole frame come off because the police were trying to enter into a rental property. Okay, you said police will pay only if it's the wrong address. Wow. So that's not good. I would definitely say fight the fine. Okay, here's how you fight the fine. If it's not too late, and I don't know if it's too late, but here's what you can do. Sometimes when you get a fine, they'll just come out, they'll cite you because something needs to be taken care of. If you go ahead and replace the door, you send them a copy of the invoice, you send them pictures showing that the door has been replaced with an explanation. They will more than likely kick that out or reduce the fine. I've seen many situations where they reduce the fine or they will just completely get rid of it. So again, you don't know unless you ask those questions, but I would definitely fight that fine with the receipt, with pictures showing that the door has been replaced. And it's unfortunate that you had to go through that. Hey, Lachelle, thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. Often tenants call DOB to get out of paying rent, nothing major, just causing trouble. Absolutely. Lachelle, you get it. You get it. Listen, I know professional tenants who will contact. So DOB is in DC, Department of Buildings, for those of you who are out of state. So in this situation, and thank you so much for sharing, Lachelle. So in situations where tenants will call the authority, they'll call the local inspector's office to complain that landlords have not made repairs or renovations are needed. And so they'll contact the authorities to say, my landlord, as nice as you are, I do know Lachelle is a great landlord. I've seen some of her property. And so you will have some tenants who will try to paint a picture as if the landlord is really, really bad. Now, if you are a tenant and you are guilty of doing that, please stop, because here's why this does not work well. Because if you have a good landlord, now there are a lot of slum landlords who really don't make repairs, but if you have a good landlord that's trying to do the right thing and yet you're making it hard for them, it's really making it hard for you, because they chose you and they want to provide quality housing to you. And so it just makes it just creates a bad vibe when you treat a good person really, really bad. And nothing good comes out of that. I like to believe in karma, right? Karma is real. You treat people bad, bad comes back to you. And it may not come back from that landlord, but the law of reciprocity is that when you send it out, it's going to come back, right? And so, Lachelle, I know your property is good. I've seen your property. But when it comes to tenants who will try to get out of paying their rent, like I was saying before, they will contact the authority. They'll contact the inspector's office to make a complaint that something is not right with the rental property. And so in a situation like that, the inspector will come out. They'll create a whole list of things that need to be repaired. They'll send that list with the fees, the fines to the landlord to say, hey, we have come out to your rental property, we've inspected it, and here is a laundry list of repairs that are needed. And in addition to the repairs, each item has a cost. So let's say, for instance, there is a smoke detector. And Lachelle, I wish I knew that you were going to come on with that. I would have had the Department of Building. I have a list of their fines. I have one young lady I was working with a couple of months ago, and she had almost $50,000 in fines. Various apartments. I don't remember how many apartments, but in each apartment, I think like a smoke detector. Let's just hypothetically say that a smoke detector fine. Now, the tenant took the smoke detector down, but when the housing inspector came out, they cited the landlord. And let's just hypothetically say, because I don't remember the actual amount, but let's just say hypothetically, that fine was $2,500. That housing inspector wrote a laundry list of issues because the tenant called to complain. And that is a way, sometimes, unfortunately, that some people will try to get out of paying their rent. But here's the thing. Just because repairs are needed does not give you, let me just speak to tenants real quick here. Just because repairs are needed, it does not give you the green light to not pay your rent unless you have gone to court, or unless you are in a jurisdiction where maybe you can put your money in a court registry or something like that. Just because repairs are needed does not give you the green light to not pay your rent. Here's why that's important. Landlords, please listen to me. Tenants, please hear me when I tell you this. If you, as a tenant, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, so let's say you have a landlord who is a slum landlord. I'm not talking about a good landlord. I'm talking about a slum landlord who does not make repairs. They don't care about you. They don't care about the rental property. They don't care that you have mice, roaches, bed bugs. They don't care that you have feces all over the floor. They don't even come and do inspections. They don't even care. They just want the rent money, right? So let's say in that situation, you take your landlord to court because, well, I'm sorry, you stop paying your rent because the landlord has not made repairs. So now all of a sudden, the landlord attorney gets involved and you are taken to court for non-payment of rent. Now, of course, you do have an option to go before the judge and tell the judge, hey, Your Honor, I didn't pay my rent because my landlord didn't make repairs. So the judge, in many cases, will make sure an inspector goes out. Sorry about that, guys. Had something in my eye. The judge, in many cases, will make sure that an inspector will go out to assess the property. They will assess the condition of the rental property. Now, usually landlords will have time to make the repairs. And if the landlord has been listening to me at any given time, they will already know that before you go to court, you go in and you make repairs. Most landlords who listen to me know that, right? Because they already know that they should be making the necessary repairs. So you go before the judge, you tell the judge, listen, Your Honor, I would have paid my rent, but the landlord didn't make the repairs. But now here it is, you have a strike against you because the landlord has taken you to court for non-payment of rent. So don't allow it to backfire. So understand what you can and cannot do as a tenant. Yes, you do have rights, but there's a legal way, there's a right way, and there's a wrong way to handle situations. So the right way to handle a situation would be to not just pay your rent, pay your bills, spend it on whatever you want to spend it on, going out to the club, getting your hair done, getting your lashes done, whatever, right? Don't take your rent money and do those things. If you're going to not pay your landlord, at least put it in the bank. Put it in the escrow account just in case you do have to pay it. Because here's the thing. If that landlord somehow becomes knowledgeable because somebody shared my videos with them, or maybe they went to my videos on my YouTube channel, Landlord Life with Karissa Spann, they watch the replays and they learn, oh, well, let me start making repairs. Let me make sure that I have a business license in place because I'll need those things to take this tenant to court. So let's say the landlord start to work on these things. You get to court and now you're potentially faced with an eviction because you have not paid your rent. Okay, so don't cause yourself as a tenant to go into a trick bag because of what you don't know. All right. But it happens all the time. All right. Lachelle, you said, thank you for being impartial and helping both tenants and landlords. Absolutely. I love what I do. I absolutely love what I do. So Lachelle, okay, so you corrected me on the fine for the smoke detector. Okay, now this is the cost in this jurisdiction that Lachelle is mentioning. If a landlord is fined by Department of Building, which is in Washington, D.C., you will be hit with a fine of $2,358 if your rental property does not have a smoke detector. That's just for the smoke detector. And for everything that's wrong, there's a fine. There's a fee. Okay? And so these things will begin to add up over time. So you definitely don't want to do that. All right? Thank you for sharing that, Lachelle. And so we're talking about landlord and tenant wars, unpaid rent versus needed repairs. Make a business decision, not an emotional decision, but make a business decision. Look at your rental lease agreement. Look at what is in place. Look at your policies. If you have SOPs, look at your business practice. And if you don't have those things together, now is a good time to start getting those things in order. Look at your application. Look at any rules or regulations. For instance, when you have a vacant unit and you're looking for a new tenant, are you having conversations with tenants up front so that they'll know what to expect out of you as a landlord? Are you covering things in your rental lease agreement before you even sign it so that tenants will understand what they are signing up for? Do you have enough coverage in your rental lease agreement? Do you have enough? Okay, so here's why that's important. Many of you have been watching me for years. And one of the things you have heard me say likely over the years is that my rental lease agreement that I use, that I help people write or create for their rental property is at least 61 pages long. Okay. But it covers your asset. Okay. The rental property, your butt, that I promise if you put it in writing, now you don't want to put something in writing that is illegal. Let me just say that because I've seen that as well when landlords will put things in the lease and it's not legal. You try to take the tenant to court and you don't have a leg to stand on. Don't do that. But you want to put it in writing. And you also want to have conversations with tenants or applicants up front because Here's why I would rather have someone say, you know what, thank you, but no thank you. I don't want to rent from you. Here's why that's important. Because I don't want the wrong tenant in the rental property. I want the right tenant in your rental property. So as a landlord, you want to have those conversations. You want to ask questions. Now, you can be nice because I always believe that you can catch more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. And sometimes it just doesn't quite work out 100%. But I promise you can shoot for the moon with being nice. Don't be angry. Don't be bitter. Keep it professional and treat your business like a business. Don't wear your emotions on your sleeve. Don't get into arguments with tenants. You are the housing provider. They are the renter. That's it. It's a business transaction. Respect both sides of the aisle. Landlords respect tenants. Tenants respect landlords. And at the end of the day, that is how we improve the rental community. Okay? So we're talking about landlord and tenant wars. Some landlords will not make repairs when tenants are not paying the rent. I had a young lady who came to me because someone told her about a conversation that I had with them. In a rental community, I shared they were asking for something. And I'm not going to go into the deep details of it, but they were asking for something. They were asking for above and beyond services, right? And I said, well, if we had more tenants who were actually paying their rent, we could provide those services. And so they went and told somebody else who came back to me and said, well, Karissa, did you really say that? I absolutely did, because I want people to understand the seriousness of a rental business. I know that some tenants think that all landlords are rich and all they want to do is just get over. They got all this money in the world. Why can't they just let me live rent free? Why can't they replace my carpet every year, every 5 years? Why can't they paint my walls? Why can't they add all these extra things? Well, all those things do cost money. Now, some landlords, they do have money. They have cushion, they have capital, and they have the money and will actually do those things. But not all landlords have that type of backing. They don't have that financial backing, especially smaller landlords, those who are up in age or, maybe they're elderly. They don't have a whole lot of money to allow tenants to stay in their rental property, not pay the rent, because bills have to be paid. The water bill has to be paid, whether the tenant is paying it or not. Taxes on the property got to be paid. Some of these rental properties have a mortgage. They have bills that are due. They have to pay staff. They have to pay maintenance workers. They have to pay exterminators. They have to pay city taxes. They have to pay so many things. And so it is not always as easy as people think when it comes to being a landlord. It can be a nightmare. It could be a headache. It could be frustrating, right? But at the end of the day, it is a business. And so please, ma'am, please, sir, as a landlord, treat your business like a business. So I asked a question a little bit earlier. What could this landlord have done in order to prevent from going down that god awful road and journey that they now are on? So one of the things that they could have done was an inspection. They could have made sure repairs were completed, because they did not know the condition of that rental property. I don't even know if they ever conducted an inspection. That's really bad for business. If you are an owner, if you are managing property for someone else, please make sure that inspections are conducted at least once a year. Now, I would venture to say that once a year is still not enough. So for me, because I'm just so thorough in what I do, I will always tell others, conduct quarterly inspections, conduct semi-annual inspections, at least no less than twice a year. I know that sometimes that might be a bit much, especially if you have a lot of rental property. And if you can't do it, hire somebody who can come in and help you assess the condition of the rental property to know what needs to be done. Because if you take care of the problem when it's small, it doesn't grow to something great and excessive and beyond your ability to take care of repairs. And so when that happens and you're hit with a fine from an inspector's office and you can't afford to pay it, what are you going to do? Because the repairs still have to be completed. And it's not cheap. It's not cheap at all. And so I wanted to share that today. I wanted to touch on this for landlords as well as tenants. Unpaid rent versus needed repairs. Now, as a tenant, here's why you never, ever, ever, again, just to reiterate why you don't want your landlord to take you to court, because it looks bad. So let's say, for instance, you move out of this rental property and you move on to another place. A landlord, the next landlord, have likely watched one of my lives or my replay, and they know that they should be conducting a background check. So let's say, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, you move on from their landlord, they took you to court, it just didn't work out for you or them, right? The next landlord, they're going to conduct that background check. They're going to check the court registry. I'm sorry, they're going to check your eviction history. They're going to realize that your landlord has taken you to court. That's going to be a strike against you. It could be a strike against you. Let me just state that, because in some jurisdictions, the laws are changing. But nonetheless, you don't want a landlord to take you to court, okay? That's never, ever good to have on your record. Now, yes, you can explain what happened, but all landlords don't care. And here's the thing. Being a landlord is not a business that requires them to care. They don't have to care, right? They just have a rental property. They want to rent it out. They don't have to know you personally. They don't have to know if you are a nice person. They don't have to know if you have kids. They don't have to know your mama's name. They don't have to know any of that. They don't have to know your birth date and if you have a dog or your dog's name. They don't have to care. Some landlords do not have a heart. It's a business for them, and it's all about running and operating a business. Now, that's why I put a great emphasis on, if you do have a good landlord that is willing to work with you, please respect that person, because they don't have to have a heart. There is no law that requires a landlord to care. They're required to make sure that rental property is in compliance. All right, Ronnie G. Can a landlord call Department of Building if a tenant doesn't let you in to make repairs? And what will DOB do? Will they come out? That's a great question. So I have not seen many cases where tenants are forced to allow the landlord in by calling Department of Building. The best thing that I would recommend in that case is to take that tenant to court, because that would entail taking them to court so that you can enforce the lease, because Department of Building is all about inspections and making sure that the property meets the housing codes, right? But if a tenant is not letting you in, enforce your lease, take them to court, serve them with a notice to vacate, a cure correct violation. If they don't allow you in, when that notice expires, take them to court, because the judge will have to make a decision, not Department of Building. So you could call Department of Building, but I don't think that's going to make a difference. I don't think that's going to get you the results that you're looking for. But thank you for that question. Are there any other questions before I jump off? I know that I shared a lot, but it's all still in the same vein of landlord and tenant wars. Because here's the thing. Like I said, being a landlord is not always easy. It's not always, you're not always well received. It's not always, sometimes you may not feel appreciated as a landlord, right? When you have a tenant who is tearing up your property, that's not paying you rent, that's disrespecting you, doesn't make you feel good, doesn't give you that warm and fuzzy feeling, right? But it does happen, and it happens more than people know or think. And so as a tenant, I hope that I shared something of value for you. This is what I do each and every Monday. I'm right here. I'm live on Facebook. I'm live on LinkedIn, and I'm also live on YouTube. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go over and find me on YouTube, Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Spann. There you can find the various videos and the lives that I've conducted. You can watch some of the replays. You'll be able to also see that I do read the comments, and I do respond to the comments that come in on my YouTube channel. And again, if you desire to email me, let me share my email address again. Give me 1 second. Let me put it back up on the screen for you. That is my email address at the bottom of the screen there, info@landlordlyfe.com. Here you can find me every Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My time is up. I absolutely thank you for yours. I am Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. It's always a pleasure to share with you, to provide information. I hope that this was helpful. Please make sure that you come back next Monday. Please tell somebody to join you in the discussion and the conversations that we were having last month. The month of April was all about fair housing. I touched on a lot. So if you missed any of those segments in April, please go back to that YouTube channel, watch some of those replays, because I touched on some things that can save landlords thousands of dollars, because what you don't know can and will hurt you and can cost you a whole lot of time. It can cost you a whole lot of money. So my goal is to hopefully provide value and information so that you can prevent from having to go down that road. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, guys. Look, I do, again, appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you all next week. I'm going to say bye for now.